Yukon Territory covers close to 500,000 square kilometers of boreal forest and river canyon. Most people who've heard of it know exactly one story. 1896, gold on Bonanza Creek in the stampede that followed. Almost nobody knows what happened to the towns that stampede left behind. There is a bar in Dawson City where the membership rule is simple. Your lips have to touch a preserved human toe sitting in your drink. There is a mining camp on Dominion Creek that briefly held more people than Dawson City itself, then vanished so completely that most Yukoners have never heard its name. There is a company town, abandoned in 1978, still too contaminated to safely clean up today. Stick with us until number 1 because it may be the largest ghost town standing anywhere in the Yukon, on the shore of a lake so blue it looks unreal. This is Cold Case Geography, where we dig up the town's history skipped. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button because we post deep dives like this every week. Today we're counting down 10 real verified towns from the Klondike Goldfields and the wider Yukon Gold Rush story. Number 10. Dawson City. The bar where you kiss a dead man's toe. At the downtown hotel in Dawson City, there is a drinking club with exactly one membership requirement. You order a shot, a bartender drops in a preserved human toe, and you drink until your lips touch it. That's the whole ritual. It's called the Sourdough Cocktail Club, and it started in 1973 when a local riverboat captain everyone called Captain Dick Stevenson found a jar in an abandoned cabin. Inside was a toe, amputated with an axe back in the 1920s, after a rum runner named Louis Lincoln got frostbite so severe during a Prohibition-era blizzard that his brother had to cut it off to prevent gangrene. The brothers kept it in a jar of alcohol as a grim little souvenir. 50 years later, Stevenson found the jar, brought it to the Sourdough Saloon, and started daring people to drink with it floating in their glass. The rule has never changed. You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but your lips must touch the toe. Since then, more than 25 toes have been donated by members of the public, because apparently that's a thing people do now. Here's the wild part. The original toe didn't survive its first decade. In July 1980, a miner going for the club record tipped his chair over backward and accidentally swallowed it whole. It was never recovered. Roughly 86,000 cocktails have been served since 1973, and the Sourdough Saloon still pours them nightly. In 2013, one man swallowed a toe deliberately, was fined $500, and had to leave town before he was eventually welcomed back. Dawson City has a real history behind all of this. 16,000 people at the height of the gold rush, down to just over 1,500 today. But if you ask most visitors what they actually remember about Dawson City, it's the toe. Number 9. Snag, Yukon, the coldest town in North America. On February 3, 1947, the temperature at a tiny airstrip called Snag dropped to minus 63 degrees Celsius. That's minus 81.4 degrees Fahrenheit, still the coldest temperature ever officially recorded anywhere in North America. The weather technicians on duty that morning had to notch the glass casing of their thermometer because the mercury had fallen below the lowest number the instrument was built to measure. Water tossed into the air froze into pellets before it hit the ground. Sound carried with such unusual clarity that witnesses described hearing voices and footsteps from what felt like miles away. An axe head reportedly shattered like glass when it struck a block of ice. Snag wasn't a purpose-built research station. It started as an emergency airstrip in 1942, part of the Northwest Staging Route, a wartime supply corridor moving Lend-Lease aircraft north toward the Soviet Union. In the winter of 1946 into 1947, a high-pressure system parked itself over the Yukon for weeks, calm and clear, and the bowl-shaped valley around Snag trapped the cold air pouring down off the surrounding mountains until it had nowhere left to go. The name itself dates back to the Gold Rush era. Boatmen called underwater logs snags because the milky, silt-choked water here made them nearly invisible from the surface. The airstrip and weather station operated until 1966. A meteorologist who visited decades later, tracking down the coldest spot in North America, called what he found simply a ghost town, one shell of a log building and an overgrown airstrip swallowed by balsam poplar. Nobody set out to chase a world record here. They just wrote down what the thermometer refused to measure and kept on flying, Number 8. Granville, Yukon. The town bigger than Dawson City that no one remembers. Here's the thing about the Klondike Gold Rush. Dawson City wasn't always the biggest town in it. In 1899, the Northwest Mounted Police ran a census on Dominion Creek, one of the Rush's richer tributaries, and counted 4,917 people living at a camp called Granville. Dawson City, that same year, counted 4,236. For one census, on paper, a town almost nobody has heard of outnumbered the town that gave the entire gold rush its name. Granville existed for the same reason every creek mouth camp in the Klondike existed. Prospectors needed hotels, stores, and saloons close to their claims, and those sprang up almost overnight, the same way they did at Grand Forks and half a dozen other camps scattered along Bonanza, Hunker, and Sulphur Creeks. But these towns were never built to last. They existed purely to service the individual miners working the surrounding ground. And once large corporate operators arrived with mechanized dredges, the same dredges that would later demolish Grand Forks outright, there was no economic reason for a place like Granville to exist anymore. It didn't get flooded, burned, or bulldozed. It just quietly stopped being useful, and the people who lived there moved on to the next creek, or the next rush entirely. No structures survive today. No foundations, no cemetery, nothing marking the spot. A town that briefly outpopulated the capital of the entire Klondike Gold Rush left behind less physical evidence than almost anywhere else on this list. That's the Klondike for you. Size meant nothing at all once the gold ran out first. Number 7. Klondike City. Also known, almost exclusively in fact, as Lousetown. Officially, the settlement across the river from Dawson City was called Klondike City. Almost nobody who lived through the gold rush called it that. They called it Lousetown, and the nickname stuck so hard it outlived the place itself. For thousands of years before any of this, the point of land where the Klondike River meets the Yukon River was known as Trochek, a salmon fishing and gathering site central to the Hen-speaking Trondak-Huetchen people. When the 1896 gold discovery triggered the stampede, tens of thousands of newcomers displaced the First Nation from Trochek within a couple of years, and a dense, improvised settlement of cabins, tents, saloons, and even a brewery grew up in its place. Archaeologists have since identified 72 cabin platforms cut into the steep riverside slope, some reinforced with stone blocks, physical proof of just how crowded this stretch of riverbank became almost overnight. As Dawson City across the river filled up with women and families and started presenting itself as a respectable frontier capital, city authorities made a decision in 1901. Push the sex trade out of Dawson's core entirely and relocated across the river to Klondike City. That decision is what cemented the settlement's reputation and its nickname as the Klondike's infamous red light district. The area even earned a mention in Jack London's novel White Fang, which tells you how far the reputation traveled beyond the Yukon itself. Here's what makes this one different from most entries on this list. It isn't really gone. The cabin platforms are still cut into that slope, and the Trondak-Huetchen have reclaimed Trochek as a seasonal fish camp, which is, in a real sense, exactly what the site was before any of this happened at all. The gold rush arrived, built a reputation nobody wanted, and left. The river and the people who fished it first stayed. Number 6. 40 Mile, Yukon. The town that registered the Klondike's first gold claim, then emptied out. Most people assume the Klondike Gold Rush started in Dawson City. It didn't. It started with a single piece of paperwork filed at 40 Mile, a trading post at the confluence of the Yukon and 40 Mile rivers that had already existed for a full decade before Bonanza Creek made headlines. 40 Mile was established in 1886, a full 10 years before the famous strike, and is generally considered the oldest non-indigenous town in the Yukon. By 1894, this remote outpost had 2 well-stocked trading company stores, a lending library, a billiard room, somewhere between 6 and 10 saloons depending on which account you trust, 2 restaurants, a theater, an opera house, a watchmaker, and several distilleries. The Yukon's first mission school opened here in 1887, run by the Anglican Church, and so did the territory's first Northwest Mounted Police detachment. Then, in August 1896, gold turned up on Bonanza Creek, and it was 40 Mile's mining recorder's office, not Dawson City's, because Dawson City didn't exist yet, where the historic discovery claim was legally registered. That single filing is, Administratively speaking, the official birthplace of the entire Klondike gold rush. And then the rush it had just registered turned around and gutted it. Within months, nearly the whole population of 40 Mile packed up and moved to the new boomtown taking shape downriver. The last permanent resident of 40 Mile reportedly didn't die until 1958, decades after the town had effectively stopped functioning as one. Getting there today still means a rough 2-hour drive north of Dawson City on roads that call for a vehicle with real ground clearance. Once you arrive, the old Royal Northwest Mounted Police Station and several trading company buildings are still standing, preserved as part of a historic site co-managed by the Klondike Wet'suwet'en First Nation and the Yukon government. The town that started the Klondike Gold Rush on paper barely got to watch it happen. If you're finding these forgotten Yukon stories interesting, drop a thumbs up and let us know in the comments which of these towns surprised you most. Granville quietly outnumbering Dawson City is the one that gets people every time. We've covered some strange spots so far, but the back half of this list gets a lot heavier. Number 5. Elsa, Yukon. The silver town the company left behind. Elsa exists for one reason. In 1935, a mining company called Treadwell Yukon decided a silver deposit tucked into the foothills of the Mackenzie Mountains above the Stewart River Valley was worth building an entire town around, and did exactly that from nothing. In 1946, ownership passed to United Keno Hill Mines, and over the following decade that company turned the operation into the second largest silver producer in Canada and the fourth largest in the world, a scale that's almost impossible to square with how small and remote this place actually is. Elsa's population climbed right alongside the mine's fortunes, 98 people in 1941, rising to a formally recorded 529 by the 1966 census, with company figures putting the true number, including families, closer to 600 at its peak. For decades, this was a real town, reached by a long drive north from Whitehorse along the dedicated Silver Trail Highway, houses, a payroll, garden plots, a whole community built entirely around one commodity price. And that was always the catch. When silver prices collapsed through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the economic logic that had built Elsa in the first place simply evaporated. And in 1989, United Keno Hill Mines shut the operation down for good. Some structures and mining infrastructure still stand today, along with a small caretaker presence, but Elsa is no longer a functioning company town in any real sense. It rose, and it fell entirely on the price of one metal, tracked on a chart most of its own residents probably never once looked at. Number 4. Bear Creek Compound. The company town frozen in time. By the early 1900s, the easy gold in the Klondike was gone. What was left in the ground required massive dredges, huge tracts of consolidated land, and more capital than any individual miner could raise. Entrepreneur Klondike Joe Boyle built exactly that kind of operation starting in 1905 at a site called Bear Creek just outside Dawson City, and it eventually grew into the headquarters of the Yukon Consolidated Gold Corporation. For the next 61 years, Bear Creek was the reason Dawson City didn't become a ghost town during the long, quiet decades after the gold rush ended. The compound grew to more than 60 buildings, a machine shop, a gold room where raw dredged gold was melted into ingots, a general manager's house, even a curling rink, a ball diamond, and garden plots for employees. Locals just called the whole operation the company, and old-timers later described Bear Creek as a genuinely vibrant corporate community, complete with tennis courts and Christmas parties that people still remembered fondly decades on. Then, in 1966, gold economics finally turned, and the Yukon Consolidated Gold Corporation shut the operation down. Here's the detail that stops people cold. They didn't tear it down. They didn't clear it out. They locked the doors and walked away, leaving more than 60 buildings and the tools inside them exactly where they stood on the day the gold ran out. Parks Canada owns the site now, and most of those buildings are still standing, though regular public tours have come and gone over the years, with local groups periodically pushing to reopen the compound properly. Somewhere in that machine shop, there's equipment nobody has touched since 1966, waiting, as far as anyone can tell, for a shift that is never coming back. Number 3. Grand Forks, Yukon. The town that gold built, then gold erased. Grand Forks sat at the meeting point of Bonanza and El Dorado Creeks, the two richest gold-bearing waterways in the entire Klondike. and by the height of the gold rush, roughly 10,000 people were living in or around it. That made it the second largest settlement in the Yukon, and the only community besides Dawson City to have its own municipal government. This wasn't a rough mining camp thrown up in the mud. By 1899, Grand Forks had electrical street lighting running down its main street. Belinda Mulrooney, later known as the business queen of the Klondike, built the Grand Forks Hotel there in 1897, one of the town's first major businesses. And for a few years, this Creek Junction town rivaled the territorial capital itself in wealth and importance. Then the same gold that built it turned around and destroyed it. As large mining corporations consolidated individual claims on Bonanza and Hunker Creeks and brought in mechanized dredges, the entire economic reason for Grand Forks to exist, the individual miner working his own ground, was systematically eliminated. The population fell from roughly 10,000 to around 3,000 by 1903, the year the town was formally incorporated, almost as if to mark its own decline on paper at the exact moment it should have been celebrating. It got worse from there. By 1921, the gold dredges owned by the Yukon Consolidated Gold Corporation physically reached the outskirts of Grand Forks. Rather than root around what was left of the town, the company tore down the remaining buildings and ran the dredges straight through where they had stood, churning the ground itself into gravel and mounded tailings that still cover the valley today. This wasn't neglect, and it wasn't a slow fade into ruin. This was a town being deliberately, physically consumed by the very industry that had built it in the first place. Today, the town's own Wikipedia entry states plainly that nothing of Grand Forks remains. The only real trace is the Grand Forks Cemetery, up a steep, overgrown hill where volunteer historians have spent years restoring a handful of grave markers, expanding the surviving inventory from 2 markers to 6, one small stone at a time. A town that once briefly outsized the capital of the entire Klondike Gold Rush, left behind fewer physical traces than a country churchyard. Number 2. Clinton Creek. The asbestos town still poisoning the ground. Nearly 50 years after the last resident left, the Canadian federal government still considers Clinton Creek too dangerous to walk into unsupervised. Placer miners working the nearby 40-mile district noticed strange fibrous material in this creek as early as 1887, but it wasn't until the 1950s that anyone realized what it actually was. Asbestos, marketed at the time as a miracle mineral. In 1965, Conwest Exploration, the parent company of Cassiar Asbestos Corporation, moved into production here and built an entire self-contained town from scratch to house its workforce, complete with dial telephone service and, before 1973, television, a level of comfort almost nobody expected this far into the Yukon wilderness. At its peak, roughly 500 people called Clinton Creek home. Over 13 years of operation, the mine pulled more than 12 million tons of ore out of 3 open pits, containing an estimated 940,000 tons of asbestos. Then, in 1978, Cassiar Asbestos Corporation went bankrupt, and the entire operation collapsed almost overnight. The company didn't just close the mine. The town site's buildings were literally auctioned off, and many homes were physically hauled away down the road to Dawson City, where some are reportedly still lived in today. What the company left behind was the mine itself. Unstable ground and waste rock and asbestos tailings piled along the Clinton Creek and Wolverine Creek valleys in a location prone to extreme flash flooding. That combination, toxic material sitting on unstable, flood-prone ground at the end of a dead-end road off the top of the World Highway, is exactly why the site has remained fenced off and untouched for decades, with warning signage posted by the Yukon government and no machinery running since the day it stopped. It wasn't until 2025 that the Canadian federal government formally assumed responsibility for cleaning it up from the Yukon territorial government, with construction work tentatively scheduled to begin in the summer of 2026. Half the town got trucked to Dawson City to go on living in. What's left behind at Clinton Creek itself is still, quite literally, a hazard nobody has been able to safely clean up for 2 generations. Number 1. Silver City, Yukon. The largest ghost town in the Yukon. You come around a bend on the Alaska Highway, and Kluane Lake opens up in front of you. An enormous stretch of glacier-fed water so turquoise it looks like it's been colored in, ringed by the jagged white-capped peaks of the St. Elias and Kluane mountain ranges. And there, right on the southern shore, sitting in the open with no fence and no gate, are roughly 24 wooden buildings, slowly leaning and rotting where they stand. No gift shop greets you, no plaque explains anything. Just weathered log walls, a former police barracks with its windows gone dark, wind coming straight off the lake, and in the right weeks of summer, Yukon fireweed blooming pink in vivid contrast to all that gray, collapsing wood. It feels less like a historic site and more like the town simply stopped mid-sentence and everyone just walked out and never came back for their things. That feeling isn't far off from what actually happened. Long before any of this, the Southern Tutchin people knew this spot as Men Shia Aya, a fishing and trading site where Kluane Lake's waters branch off towards Silver Creek. That changed in 1903 when Dawson Charlie, one of the three prospectors credited with the original 1896 Klondike gold discovery, staked a claim on nearby 4th of July Creek and set off a smaller secondary gold rush of his own. By the end of that year, roughly 2,000 mining claims had been staked across the Kluane region, and a boomtown sprang up almost overnight at the outlet of Silver Creek. The Northwest Mounted Police built a permanent detachment here. There was a district mining office, a post office. Until the Alaska Highway was finally built in 1942, this was the literal end of the road from Whitehorse. Go any further, and you needed a boat. But the rush that built Silver City burned out fast. Richer, easier ground turned up elsewhere in the Kluane district through the 1920s, prospectors moved on, and by 1924 the town was essentially abandoned. It wasn't quite finished with history, though. In 1942, construction crews building the Alaska Highway set up camp here again. And in 1951, the Canadian Army used the site for a 6-month training exercise, building an airfield that's still visible today. At some point after that, someone had a plan to restore Silver City as a tourist theme park. It never happened. The buildings simply kept sitting there, on private land, slowly losing the fight against Yukon winters, one roofline at a time. Today, around 23 structures remain standing, more than at almost any other ghost town in the territory, which is exactly why it's routinely described as the largest ghost town in the Yukon. You can walk right up to it. Nobody stops you. Nobody explains it either. It's just there. A police barracks, a mining office, a scattering of collapsing cabins, and a lake behind them so beautiful it makes the whole abandoned scene feel almost staged. It isn't staged. This is simply what's left after gold, government, and geography all took their turn with a piece of land, and then all three walked away and let the fireweed have it. The Klondike gave the world its most famous gold rush, but the towns it built and abandoned tell a bigger story than Dawson City alone ever could. For me, it's Silver City, a ghost town that large, that beautiful, and that unprotected is not something you forget easily. Which of these surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. If you want more real, verified history from the places most people drive straight past, subscribe to Cold Case Geography.